and plant forward. Oh, I see it's being recorded. Excellent. So we are just on time to start talking about what is plant forward, because we're talking about transitioning menus to become more plant forward. So we're defining plant forward as when your menu has a significant portion of that menu coming from plant sources. So whether it's a buffet or whether it's a hard copy or online menu, we want to see a significant portion coming from plants. Now, significant is obviously a vague term, and so there is no industry standard around this, as I've shared. We see some early adopters, which I'll show you on the next slide, so you can see what some of the larger corporations are doing as they are moving toward plant forward. Another thing I really want to mention is that when you have plant-based options on your menus, so when you have these plant-based options on your buffet or on your menus, those plant-based options should also be vegan friendly. Now we might think, well, of course they would be vegan friendly, but the truth is we see a lot of companies promoting plant-based options that are not suitable for vegans because these options are not truly fully plant-based. For example, you might see a plant-based burger patty on a bun that's not vegan friendly because the bun has eggs or milk in it, or you may see egg-based mayonnaise on a vegan burger patty. So that's just an example. We may think of salads as plant-based, but actually if they have cheese and bacon on top with an egg and some ranch dressing, it's not really a plant-based salad. That's a very non-plant-based salad. So when we think about this, we really want to think, how can we make our menus accessible to more people? And the vegan option is always going to be accessible to the most people. So we can talk about ways to do that. We're going to talk about strategies to do that so we can actually please all of our guests. Another thing we want to make sure that we are thinking through if we are committing to becoming plant forward is that these options are creatively done. They are just as thoughtfully created as any other option on our menu. Oftentimes we see the plant-based option as an afterthought, as something that was really not prepared with the customers in mind. It was the leftovers that they had, it was the one plant-based patty that they found in the supermarket. And what we need to do if we want people to actually choose these plant-based options, if we want to reduce our food-related emissions, which we'll talk about in a moment, people actually need to have options that they're excited about. So we have free choice, right? Nobody's being forced to choose these options. So we need to make them enticing. And finally, we need to clearly label these options so people know what it is they're actually choosing. And Angélica is going to talk on this a little bit later on how can we label and communicate with customers about why we're creating these plant-forward options as well. All right, thank you all for writing in the chat. I'd love to see your introductions. This is great. So you might have heard of some early adopters to this, and maybe you're following the news, maybe you're following sustainability news and seeing that many companies are now making what we're calling plant-forward pledges. So they're making commitments to transition significant portions of their menus to plant-based. So Sodexo, for example, they are transitioning their menus to plant-based because they want to achieve net zero and they have this goal. IHG Greater China has just a couple of months ago announced that they're shifting 700 hotels. At 700 hotels, they're shifting their menus to be at least 30% plant-based. And one of our consultants in China is actually supporting them with this transition. You might have heard of the Venues Collection, which is a large conglomerate of event spaces in the UK. They defined their entire approach as plant-forward, so all of their menus are plant-forward. You can see Accor, which is a popular hotel chain on the top right. They also just recently announced they are committing to Plant Forward Pledge, but even before that, I took this screenshot before that they announced it. They talk about their food-related emissions on their website as part of their food philosophy, and they acknowledge that food and beverage plays a role of 11% in their carbon emissions overall. And finally, you can see at the bottom, the Hyatt Regency, they have a food philosophy that specifically calls out, and I know this is really small, I'm going to read it for you. It says, we think plant-based is a must, not an alternative. 69% of our menu is vegan, vegetarian, or can be made so. So this is a big deal. We're seeing these major corporations make these shifts, and we're seeing more and more of this every day. If we're following this news, we are seeing that this is a trend, and it is a trend that is turning into a transition. So it's something that these companies are committing to for the long term. And of course, they need some implementation support, and that's where consultants can come in, because these teams, they don't have that specific vegan experience. And so we're asking chefs that maybe went to culinary school 30 years ago and have a ton of experience cooking meat to now all of a sudden make an overhaul of their menu and turn it into something plant forward in a tasty way, when maybe they're not even eating that way themselves. That's a tall order. And so vegan hospitality is set up to support these corporations and also smaller businesses, because we have consultants working all over the world to make these transitions. So we have to do this not only for the vegan guest experience, but of course for the general guest experience, for people who want to have sustainable events and attend sustainable events. And we're going to talk in a moment about why we're putting sustainability and plant-forward food in the same category. Events have unfortunately been notorious for leaving the plant-based options out. And even at COP29, some of you might have been following the news coming out of COP29, we saw the vegan options were so abysmal. There was a photo going around of a baguette with cucumbers on it, and that was the vegan option. So even at these climate conferences, we're not seeing them really thoughtfully planning for a plant-forward menu. So if your company has already made a plant-forward pledge, I want to congratulate you on that. That's amazing. And if you need help implementing, please just let us know. We're happy to help. And if you haven't thought about making a plant-forward pledge yet, we can help with that too. We can help you structure it and figure out what percentage of your menu it's going to make sense to start with the transition and how long that's really going to take in a reasonable way. Because another thing we're seeing is a lot of these companies announcing their pledges without having implementation plans. But why would we want to do this? So what would be the motivation to get started on this right away? Well, there are really two main reasons, and you don't have to choose either or, but maybe you're going to find yourself in one of these camps, or maybe both are happening for you at the same time. So number one, there are many companies that consider themselves as leaders in sustainability. So companies like Accor, we've seen Sodexo, we're seeing these companies, it's just part of their value statement, their corporate social responsibility and their company values, that they value sustainability. And because of that, they know they can't leave the food-related emissions out of the equation. And they're taking steps in all areas of sustainability, whether the customers are demanding it or not. They really don't care. They see themselves as leaders. So they're going to set the groundwork for what customers are going to expect at their company. And we also see a lot of these companies taking steps to minimize food waste. That goes hand in hand with the plant-forward menus. And on the other side of things, we also see companies that maybe weren't really necessarily leading in sustainability in other areas. However, they value excellence in guest services, and they're seeing the demand raising for these plant-forward options. So their guests are actually driving this change. And then, of course, some companies have both happening, and that's great. Those are the companies that we're seeing are making these pledges right away. Now, I know that there are obstacles to overcome, doubts we might have about making this transition. I'm assuming many of you are not vegan yourselves. I didn't start out as vegan. I don't think any of Angélica or Erin, we weren't born vegan. So we get that it's a transition. And you might be wondering how this might impact your organization. Some of the questions we hear from our clients are, what if I provide vegan options and guests are not interested in them? Well, of course, we don't want that. We want people to actually order the food. So we're going to talk about that today. Will plant-based ingredients be more expensive? This is a common concern. What about sustainable meat? Where does that play a role in our menus? Will plant-based products help or hurt my sustainability efforts if I can't source them locally? Local is a really major concern, and that we hear brought up a lot in these conversations. When is the best time to shift to more plant-forward menus? And how do I start with that? It can be overwhelming. How do we train staff? And how can I make this a priority when I have so much else to do? When we speak to chefs, they say, sounds great in theory. I don't have time. So we understand this is a tall order, again, to change your programming. It's a big deal to ask you to do that. But we do hope that through understanding the sustainability impact, it will become something you just feel that you don't really have a choice, that if you do want to be a sustainable company, you do have to make this transition. And that's why we're here to support. So let's talk about why plant-based is important from the environmental sustainability perspective. And I know this is small, I'm going to walk you through it. So here we have greenhouse gas emissions, land and water usage, deforestation, and biodiversity loss. And these charts are from Poor and Nemechek's data from the UN. This is very widely quoted sourced data. So About 26% of greenhouse gas emissions overall in the world come from our food system, so global food systems. 15% of that 26% is just from cows. So 15% of our global food emissions, global emissions overall come from cows. Okay, we're going to come back to the cows later. Now let's look at land and water usage. 50% of the world's habitable land is used for agriculture. And this is not an efficient system because what we're doing is we are using this land to grow animal feed. So most of the land being used in animal agriculture is not feeding humans, it's feeding the animals that then the humans will eat. And finally, we can look at biodiversity loss, which is just so enormous and just devastating, really. It's so sad. 94% of global mammal biomass, excluding humans, is livestock. That leaves 6% of wild animals left. And if we look at bird biodiversity, it's nearing the same. We have 71% of global bird biomass is poultry livestock, and chickens are actually the most, the biggest victims in our food agriculture system. There are hundreds of thousands of chickens killed, every couple hours. So it is quite a devastating experience. And this biodiversity loss happens when the forests are cleared for farmland, and especially they're being cleared, like I said, for animal feed. So of course we see an issue here. And if we can look at some solutions, we can see when we compare a plant-based meal or just a simple swap of a plant-based protein with an animal-based protein, the consequences are enormous. So if we look at the carbon emissions, we can see carbon dioxide equivalent of beef would be 60, right? And then if we look at the tofu steak, it is 10 to 12 times less than that. So tofu is 3, right? We see 3 kilograms for 1 kilogram of tofu. So we can see that the carbon emissions of a beef burger, for example, are 10 to 12 more times carbon emission than the tofu steak of the same weight. And we can look at the other items as well that might be on a menu. So lamb is also a pretty big offender, and then we start getting a bit lower. But the plant-based option is always going to be the lowest emissions option, regardless of transport, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the plant-based options are always going to be the lowest emissions on your menu when it comes to carbon and when it comes to water. And if we want to get even more extreme, we can look at a mushroom as compared to a beef. So this picture from the lion's mane mushroom, the picture on the right, those are mushrooms. And they are locally grown mushrooms that I used for a hotel training that a couple months ago, I was training a hotel that's putting lion's mane on their menu. And it tastes amazing. If you've never tried lion's mane mushroom, I recommend it. So a beef steak emits 60 to 200 times more carbon emissions than a lion's mane mushroom steak. So this is significant because we have access to plant-based alternatives now. So we're not talking about, 100 years ago when maybe we had to just eat what we could. Now we have access. We can go to a supermarket, we can go to local farmers. We can put mushrooms on our menu instead of beef. And it's just up to us to decide whether or not we care to do that. So when we think about transport and we think about supporting local food, number one, I do want to mention that supporting local economies is extremely important for sustainability purposes. But I want to talk right now just about the environmental impact of transport. So you can see from these slides that transport is pink. So you'll see a little pink box for transport. Do we see pink anywhere here, really? Not quite. We see it on the bananas because it's the only place where you can actually identify the transport as a significant source of emissions. What we're really seeing as far as what's causing these emissions is the land use change, so the clearing of the land to farm and the actual farming itself. That's what's causing the emissions. And of course, beef, like I said, is really the number one offender in this. So if we're thinking about, should I buy a tomato from a foreign country versus buying local beef? Well, if you can buy a local tomato, that's great. But if you can't, of course, the foreign tomato is going to be so much better for the environment, even though you have to transport it, than buying local beef. And that's a hard pill to swallow, I think, for some, that we think maybe we're buying local meat and it's better for the environment, but a lot of that is greenwashing marketing. So I just want to showcase a little bit of the difference between beef coming from a beef herd, so the cows that were raised specifically for meat, versus beef that is coming from the dairy herd. So the meat that's coming from the dairy cows. So dairy cows also go to the slaughterhouse when they're done producing milk and they become meat. But the emissions impact when we report it is split between the beef industry and the dairy industry. So that's why it looks like the beef from the dairy herd has half the amount of emissions impacts as the beef from the beef herd. It's the same farming, same cows, but we're splitting it between industries because they have a dual purpose. So if we are consulting for hotels, restaurants, and they do want to lower their food-related emissions, one suggestion, if they don't want to transition everything to plant-based, you can look at where you're sourcing your meat from and what kind of farming practices are happening on these farms. All right, and if anyone has questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat. So before I turn it over to Angélica, I just want to share a case study, and this actually comes from our SENFC network. So I met with Annie Botch, who is the sustainability coordinator for Rock the Ocean Foundation, which manages the Tortuga Music Festival in South Florida. And we had an amazing conversation. I did a whole interview with her, and I actually wrote it up for our blog, which I will post. I'll post it in the chat in a minute, so you can click it and look at it later if you want to. But what they did this year, so they're one of the most sustainable large music festivals in the whole world. And they had an assessment done by a professional carbon analyst that came in and told them how they can reduce their carbon emissions because they just want to keep getting better and better. And the recommendation from the analyst was transition to more plant-based meals. So that's what they did. So they started to do that this year. This was the first year that they required all vendors to have a vegan option. And they had 30 vendors and 29 of them complied with that mandate. And it took very little effort on their part. They simply just updated their registration form and asked them to do it. And then they captured the information on what the vegan options were. They promoted it. This is pictures from their Instagram account. They promoted it to their community and they were very successful with it. So through this initiative, they reported about 20% of the meals served at the festival were plant-based. And they do plan to increase this next year. They want to do even better. So Annie and I talked about ways that we can support them in making it even better next year. So one recommendation we gave them is to reduce or eliminate beef in the staff catering, because a large part of their food-related emissions also comes from staff catering. It's a huge festival. They have a lot of setup, a lot of operations happening throughout the festival. So they have these big catering carafes at the staff catering. And I think this is something that's really useful for anyone that has an event space, because you're also feeding your staff, whether you're at a hotel or wherever you are, you have staff to feed. And so we can take a look also, not just at what's being served to guests, but what's being served to staff. Now, we don't have to eliminate beef. Again, if you're worried people are going to complain, we can reduce it. So if you're making a beef stew, consider using half the amount of beef you normally would use and replace the rest with chickpeas, for example. People aren't going to complain about not having beef, but they're not even really going to know. You've just cut those emissions in half from that particular dish. So we can do that. And I do want to encourage you all who have the power to make these kind of changes, whether you're at the city level or whether you're at an organizational level, that it's worth the risk, because you're going to be seen as a leader when we look back on this and we see who's leading this effort to really, truly stand behind their sustainability values in every area. You're going to be the leader in this. And that's amazing. Another thing that's important is to educate the vendors on menu labeling and menu writing. And that's something that we're really experts at with vegan hospitality, because we've learned so much over the years from the most recent data about this. What causes people to actually choose to buy and spend their money on vegan food? Well, not really when it's called vegan taco. People need to know what's the flavor of the food, what's the texture of the food. We want to hear it's a tofu peanut crunch taco. So there's a lot that goes into writing menus and labeling them correctly. And we need to educate vendors on that if we are hosting an event. And that's, of course, where vegan hospitality can come in as a partner, or maybe you have some expertise on that already that you can share with your vendors. But don't leave them in the dark. We want their options to sell. We need to support them in that. Another thing that Tortuga is considering doing for next year is encouraging vendors to not just have one vegan option, but to actually start making a pledge to transition a portion of their menu. And while they can't, well, they could, but I don't think they're going to require vendors to make this kind of a big shift right away. But what they can do is create incentives for the ones that do. So for example, better placement at the event of those vendor stalls for the vendors that are having more plant forward options, or some special award, climate friendly award for those vendors. So you can think about how to maybe implement this in your own events. Another thing we recommended for them and for anyone is to standardize a neutral, universal symbol across the vendors for identifying vegan options. So when we're looking at menu labeling, we want to have labels that are standardized at an event, because we don't want people having to ask us so many questions, which one is vegan and which is not vegan. If everyone has a different label, it's really confusing. So we also promoted having a neutral symbol, maybe a picture of a leaf, or maybe a picture of just like a blue circle. I mean, it doesn't have to be so specifically vegan. It can be something simple, as long as there's a menu key, some way for the vegan guest to understand what that label means. And finally, we want to support their vendors. So it's also something that the vegan hospitality team offers is, if you are throwing an event and you want your vendors to have menu reviews, we're happy to review their menus and give them feedback, just to make sure that these menus are optimized for sales so that people are actually buying the food. Because again, we don't want to waste food. That defeats the whole purpose of lowering our food-related emissions. We want to make sure people are buying the plant-forward food. All right, I'm just going to put the blog into the chat in case anyone wants to check it out later. And I'm going to turn it over to Angélica.
Thanks, Meredith. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. So hi, everyone. I wanted to talk today about what it looks like to actually create these plant-forward menus. So just some ideas of things to keep in mind and what to do and not to do. So Meredith already gave a lot of information about what that looks like and how to put it together. So I'm just going to go into a little bit of more detail. So when creating hearty dishes, one of the great ways to do this would be to use legumes, mushrooms, and vegan meats, as opposed to the high carbon footprint offenders, which is, beef or lamb that we just talked about. They provide great texture and are a great substitute. Creating and using seasonable, locally sourced fruits and vegetables, preferably organic, are a much better option, as opposed to choosing something that's out of season, because it already will taste better. But depending on the type of event you are hosting, especially if someone is coming from out of town, they will prefer to know what the culture is like. So ideally, anytime you can use seasonal and local is ideal, as opposed to something that had to brought in from somewhere else. When it comes to dairy, always going for the vegan milk and cheese alternatives. Oat milk is usually the best and most sustainable plant option for milks. So I would suggest that. And when it comes to creating more of a creamy type sauce or other things, cashew cheese is actually a great alternative for that, and as well to create cheese itself. So there's many alternatives with vegan sources for dairy. And using Asian grains like quinoa, millet, or farro, they are great alternatives that are also very nutritious, and they taste amazing and much better than using white rice, for example, that uses a lot of water and land for production. Thanks, Meredith. When it comes to sweeteners, organic maple syrup or agave is ideal. Refined sugar, again, utilizes lots of water and chemicals in production, so staying away from that is ideal. And again, when you are able to feature local products in beverages as well, so looking for locally brewed kombucha or fair trade coffee and teas, we want to make sure that we are giving them a nice selection. And again, if available, local is always ideal. When it comes to garnishes, using edible flowers or herbs versus things that are not easily recyclable or composted and they're going to be discarded on drinks and food would be a better option. And when it comes to seafood, ideally opting for vegan alternatives. So hearts of palm are used many times to substitute for crab dishes. Also, trumpet mushrooms are a great alternative for scallops. Seaweed provides, that flavor that people are looking for from seafood. So there's many alternatives for this that would be more sustainable and just equally as flavorful, if not more. And when it comes to getting people involved and on board with these changes, it would be ideal to, let them know why you are doing this at your event. So using table cards that explain why you chose this locally sourced produce, or at the buffet line, having a sign that explains why you're using vegan proteins can actually not get them to understand why, you made these choices, but also get them involved. And they will feel like they're part of the solution just simply by attending your event. So when it comes to creating the vegan menus, some success strategies that would be helpful for offerings would be to, I think Meredith mentioned this a little bit earlier, was reducing the amount of meat in a dish while increasing the amount of plants, and at the same time enhancing the flavors and textures and the appearance. So playing, a lot with the colors, fruits and vegetables, and lots of vegan alternatives have beautiful colors and things. So, play that up. So make sure that the dishes look beautiful and the textures are appealing as well. And increasing the variety of the vegan dishes. So always making sure that you have a bigger ratio of vegan dishes as opposed to the amount of meat-based dishes that are being offered at a buffet or at a menu. And that will increase, the chances that these dishes will be ordered. And introducing vegan alternatives to popular meat-based dishes. So this would mean, let's say, using a bolognese sauce, but using a vegan meat alternative instead, and letting the guests taste the texture and the flavor and realizing, how similar they are, but also just as flavorful. And obviously, in this case, much more sustainable. Some other options or ideas for presentations would be to use language on the menus to emphasize the positive attributes of the vegan dishes. So really describing the dishes in a way that is appealing and sounds great for the guest, and listing these dishes actually in the main body of a menu in order for them to be ordered versus having them on a separate menu, or even labeling them in a way that is not as easily understood. So for example, naming the dishes as crispy barbecue tofu actually describes the dish. You can expect it to be, tasty, versus something like vegan tofu delight that might be confusing and people might not know what that actually means. And they might see that, okay, is this vegan? So this is where the labeling comes from. So even though it says crispy barbecue tofu, once you label them properly based on allergens, people will know, okay, they can easily identify these dishes on the menu and know what the allergens are. And recommending vegan dishes as well helps for them to be ordered. So featuring certain dishes on the menu sometimes helps people visualize this better and see, okay, this sounds like a great dish, something that they might not necessarily thought about ordering before. So just some ideas of how to present these dishes to guests. I think this is Erin's.
Yeah, we're going to turn it over to Erin now.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for all being here. So when implementing plant-forward commitments, we want to make sure that we are streamlining procedures to guide changes and not leaving it up to the individual or the chef to figure out how to implement. So we want to be part of that process. So we're not having more work for the chef. And the same goes on a higher level at the corporate level, to make a corporate plant forward commitment, because that helps then oversee all of the other parts of the hotel or event that you're having, that higher up person is on board as well. And we've done a lot of that because we ourselves as vegan consultants have done the market research, which we can provide if you are trying to have a local event and make it more vegan friendly, we have research to then show whoever you are meeting with to help with that. And that always helps because then it's not just you or your opinion, but you have the research there to present, which I love having as much research as I can because it just makes it an easier sell. And then having a thoughtful vegan friendly option that everyone can enjoy. And that is, I mean, when we eat out or we have events or anything, who doesn't talk about the food, right? That's always what we're talking about. So we really want to emphasize that these options are tasty for everybody. And again, we don't want to forget about the bread basket, proteins, drinks, and desserts, because that's a lot of times what does get forgotten. You know, if you're out to dinner and they bring bread, you have to always ask, is this bread basket vegan? And then what about the proteins? Because how many times have we all been somewhere where the only options for vegans are baked potatoes and steamed broccoli, right? What about the protein part of that? And drinks and dessert. And oftentimes we are forgotten in that arena too. So these are really important things to consider when you're having an event, especially something that's sustainable or plant-based. You really want to make sure that we're really thinking through all of those choices, and also making the allergen information really available to everybody, because we're not just trying to attract vegans or people that want to dip into the plant-based space. We want to make sure that people who have gluten allergies, nut allergies, any kind of dairy allergy, that they are comfortable and not having to ask, because a lot of times, especially on buffets, that information won't be there. And so then you're often maybe uncomfortable asking. So you want the guests to think through the guest process of what they're experiencing when they go to a buffet or to an event, that they might not feel comfortable asking, you know, and bothering somebody. They want to be able to have that information there. So since we started talking about buffets, I think a buffet is a great way to really provide a lot of color, like we had talked about. Angélica was talking about color before. I think it's a great way to really show that plant-based eating isn't just about fruits and veggies, right? Like there could be those choices put more in the beginning, because when you go to a regular buffet, a lot of times they're so meat heavy that the plant-based options are at the end, you know, or maybe they start with a salad. So I think when you are setting up a buffet, you want to put the plant-based options first, because you want to introduce those right away. So people are more apt to walk up to that buffet and see that, you know, stir-fried tofu with all those vegetables and colors and beans or whatever you're using, or alternative meats, and the description, so that they can get that first and less of the other stuff, the meat, down the road on that buffet. Again, because what happens? Vegans are expected to get full on salad alone, and we know that that is just not true. Another thing we had talked about, I thought was a really great option, is to keep the meat options as order only, right? So why not, instead of just having it on the buffet as an option, why not have it for people, if they really do want it, that they would have to go out of their way to order it, right? That's another step for them. When they've gotten all these plant-based options in the beginning part of this buffet, and then now if they really wanted something meat forward, they would have to ask for it. I think it's a great way to make plant-based eating in a buffet style a lot more attractive. And then by doing that, you're contributing less to food waste. So, and then get creative with the tasty vegan options, descriptions, and displays. Because walking up to a display and you see vegan tofu as an option may not entice you, but listening or reading a display about crispy chickpea encrusted peanut tofu would make anybody want to go, oh, love that. That sounds amazing. Let me at least try it. So I think that's kind of our goal here, is to talk through ways to make it more attractive to people. Because just having a piece of tofu that's not seasoned, or steamed vegetables, is not something that helps our cause. So sourcing vegan-friendly suppliers. Seeking suppliers, vendors, and caterers in your area is obviously always going to be better. And if you're having issues with that, certainly a vegan hospitality consultant can help you with that, because we tap into so many different networks of suppliers and vendors and caterers. And sometimes making sure that they don't have issues with going out of stock. So that's another really big part of our job, is to help with knowing how much to order for what your event is. And then another thing we really haven't talked a lot about today is the vegan wines and other drinks. So vegan wines, believe it or not, everybody thinks that most wines are vegan, but they are not. And now there's a vegan Bailey's out, so that would be a great thing to have included. And then making sure your suppliers are staying up to date on the plant-based trends, ask them what their best selling plant-based products are, and make sure that they know that the products are vegan and they don't need certification necessarily in order to be considered vegan friendly, because you already know that. And then supporting our local community is in all areas is really big, especially here in Florida. I know a lot of people here are here in Florida. There's so much local businesses that are small business, independent businesses, and we want to support those businesses, because those are the businesses are taking the extra steps. Those are the businesses that are being more sustainable. And this is what we are promoting as a whole, right? So supporting local, and then highlighting that even if you're doing it on a buffet, or having that at your event, think about the impact of a guest walking up and reading that this came from, right down the street. And maybe that is something that really motivates somebody to then go and support that small business, right? That's how we build this community even more. Meredith, you want to take over?
Sure, I'll take over. All right. So when is the best time to get started? Well, we can say now, right? We can say now, maybe not right now because we're about to enter the holidays, but now meaning don't wait too long, because we know there are consequences of waiting too long. We've seen this happen. So we've seen, usually by the time I get to a session with a client that's ready to hire me, it's because they have a problem that needs to be solved. And it's usually that the staff is complaining because no one wants to order from the menu anymore. Everyone's coming in demanding special requests. They don't have the food in the kitchen they need in order to create food for vegan guests. So that's a major issue. You don't want to wait till your staff is complaining about that. Other things that are consequences of waiting too long is losing opportunities. So when you're a caterer for weddings, and a vegan guest calls and says, I want to plan a vegan wedding, and you haven't sorted out, well, how would I do that? Then we've missed that opportunity. So we also get a lot of clients that have been turning guests away, and they don't want to do that anymore. They've realized that they're losing business. And other clients also come because they are getting poor reviews, because they're serving that plain tofu and the steamed vegetables and can't even tell you how many pasta marinaras I've had to suffer through at restaurants you wouldn't even expect would be serving pasta marinara, like a sushi restaurant. But the point is that we don't want to have problems like this. These problems are solvable. So we want to prepare rather than react. We want to be taking initiative and be leaders in this. And another thing that we're now seeing is these larger companies getting called out for not aligning their menus with their sustainability goals. We can see companies coming out with huge sustainability policies and serving beef at these conferences. No one's going to take you seriously. So we really have to be aware of our public image as well. And what do we stand for as people who care about sustainability? I only have 2 more slides, so we're almost done. I just want to share with you some ways to move forward. What we are really proud of is our certification programs and our corporate strategic planning initiatives. Right now, we have a hotel certification program that we just launched this past Earth Day, and we have 10 boutique hotels certified already. We are certifying these hotels that welcome vegan guests. So it's not a certification only for vegan hotels, but a certification for hotels that want to be known as being vegan friendly. And through that program, they don't just get a badge, they get a staff training that is scalable, so can be scaled to hundreds of employees. They also get a strategic planning meeting with a consultant that is able to talk through goals with them around creating a vegan guest strategy, around their food-related emissions, and figuring out, it's a 32-page workbook that we work on with them, but really figuring out how do we want to move forward and become a leader in this. So if you are affiliated with hotels, or you know a hotel that might be interested in this, then please feel free to refer them, and I'll our contact information is on the next slide, but you can always go to veganhospitality.com and everything is there. We also have a certification for staff. So through the hotel certification program, we have this staff training and each staff member gets certified as well. So we have a certification partner we use for the certifications and everything is digital. It's compatible with LinkedIn. So it's a really cool program that people can showcase on their resumes that they were certified in vegan guest training. And we also provide custom trainings, of course, and certifications for event venues. We have not certified any event venues yet, but we are close to it, hopefully in Florida. And we are happy to work with you where you're at. Like I said, we're a mission-driven organization, and our goal is to support this industry in moving forward, becoming vegan friendly and becoming more sustainable in the food area. So we're happy to chat with you and just see where you're at and see how we can support you. Here is our contact info, and I might recommend you just take a screenshot of it if you feel like it's a lot of information and you want to capture it. So I should mention that I am based in the Caribbean. I live in Aruba, and Angélica lives in Jacksonville, Florida, and Erin is in Tampa, Florida. So we're all in this SENFC region. And we also, of course, work virtually and travel. So feel free to reach out to any of us. If you reach out to me and you have a project that is specific to Tampa or Jacksonville, I am going to refer you to Erin and Angélica, who are the consultants in those locations. But we have consultants in other areas of Florida too, and of course, around the world. So feel free to reach out to me about that. And some of the things we can support you on, we are happy to give a free consult as a starter just to chat with you and see what your needs are. We also have immediate menu support. So let's say you have an event coming up right away and you want us to take a look at your menu. You can do that straight via our website, or you can just email me or message me on LinkedIn. I'm very friendly. I love to chat. So feel free to reach out and I'll guide you in the right direction. You can also partner with consultants to curate your next event. If you just feel like you have too much on your plate and you want a consultant to handle that part, we can provide that. I just spoke about the hotel certification, and we also love to speak. We love to do trainings. So if you have a group that you feel like needs this kind of information, or you want us to get even more into the food sustainability side of things and prepare some sort of speech for maybe your employee wellness week or any other conference you might be having, you're welcome to reach out to us as well. And if I'm not available, or if there's someone more appropriate in your region, I'm happy to refer you to them. I'm going to stop the slide share now so that we can just open it up for questions in case anyone has any. I didn't see any questions in the chat. I guess that means we were very comprehensive. Any questions? We'll give you a chance to just write them in the chat or turn on your mic if you feel like you want to do that. No.
I have a question. Is there a correlation to more demand for the vegan menu with younger event attendees, whether it's conferences or single special events? Is there a correlation? Are you seeing more demand?
Yes, there is. I mean, I would think that it's not just demand, that it's an expectation that if younger people are going to these events and not seeing, they're not going to stay very long. I mean, I can share that. So I don't know if I'm considered young, I'm 38, but I was just at a conference a couple of weeks ago and I had to leave early because there was no food. I mean, it's just simply you have to eat. So we're not going to be able to attend an event if we have these ethical lifestyles where we've committed to only eating a certain way 100% of the time. We won't actually be able to enjoy the event without food there for us. So I would say it's an expectation at this point. I do see older audiences interested as well. In fact, so I live in Aruba and I organize a lot of work in Aruba. So I work with a lot of hotels, and much of the tourist population here is older, on the older side, and they are also really looking for these healthier options. And so they go for the vegan options because they know that they were created with their health in mind. That was a really great question. And there's lots of research out there too. I know Stephen put in the chat the Better Food Foundation research. They've got some great research studies on their website.
Thank you.
Welcome. Could I ask you all a question? Is anyone feeling inspired to do anything different based on this information? Or are you already all working on this? I see Mary Jo says, thank you for the great info. Thank you for being here.
I know
Marianne?
for us, we are we're trying to do at least one vegan meal whenever we sponsor events. We had a group of planners here last month, and we did the lunch was all vegan. And because we were working with Sodexo and they do such a great job. And we didn't tell anyone, we didn't put it anywhere. And when, while they were eating, we did a presentation. And one of the things we said was, you know, we're trying to do one meal at least being plant-based. We hope you will do the same. And then I asked them, did you guys realize the lunch you're eating is all plant-based? And they were all amazed. So I think, you know, when you were saying, just try it.
Right.
You're not going to get the pushback that you think you're going to get.
Mhm.
So it's important. Just go out on a limb, just try it. And we have
you for
nothing to
sharing
lose,
that.
I guess is what I want to say.
Thank you for sharing that. And we hear this kind of anecdotes all the time that people don't even realize what they're eating is plant-based, because are you thinking that when you eat a banana in the morning? No, you're just eating a banana. You're not thinking, I love this vegan food. You're just eating your
Yes.
banana. So, you know, I think we expect pushback, but that's a lot of, again, a lot of marketing, a lot of media manipulation. It's people aren't going to be angry at you for giving them a banana. They like bananas. So Marianne, I would even encourage you to think, how can I make an even stronger commitment this year? So maybe more than one option, maybe two, you know, thinking about what can we do and see, are people going to notice even if we've made that change? Any
I'm all for the one step at a time. You know, you throw it out at baby steps. And clearly, as the population ages, we're going in this direction anyway. So the case to be made for the higher ups that are resisting it is you're just going to be a step ahead of the curve by coming on board with it. And I do think it's important not to make people give up their meat. So it's a few options presented, as you said, very enticingly and beautifully made, and you know, and you get people more and more appreciating it on all sides of the aisle, shall we say.
Exactly. And we have to remember there's a lot of different kinds of meat. So like I shared, you know, beef is quite the worst. It's very much the worst offender when we're talking about carbon emissions. So if we run a sustainability focused organization, beef really has no place on the menu, in my opinion. But if you don't want to make people give up meat, there's a lot of other animals that we can put on the menu if you feel the need to do that, that are much lower in the environmental impacts. Yeah. Any other feedback or questions, Stephen?
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the greenhouse gases. There's a lot of publicity about organizations that want to cut the greenhouse emissions in the next 10 or 15 years and all sorts of goals. My understanding now, my numbers are kind of approximate here, but my understanding is that carbon dioxide, which is the big gas you always hear about, stays in the atmosphere for something like 100 years. Whereas methane, which you don't hear that much about, stays in the atmosphere for something like 10 to 20 years. The thing is, though, that methane has a greenhouse effect that's something like 25 times as intense as carbon dioxide. So if we're, you know, so methane produced now, it won't be there in 30 years. But if we're concerned about what's happening in the next 10 to 15 years, the methane, which comes largely from animal agriculture, has a really major impact, and I don't think that gets enough publicity. Also, regarding meat on the buffets, I like the comment about start with your vegetable items first and put the meat at the end of the buffet, so people will fill up their plates with more vegetables first. And I don't know if it was mentioned, the idea that you can really make just about everything on the buffet totally plant-based. And then at the end of the buffet, have some dishes where people can add some beef or ham or chopped eggs or, you know, anything else that they can then make that dish. In other words, if you, instead of putting ham in your beans, you could put ham at the end of the line and people can mix it into their beans just as an alternative. Because I like for everybody to eat together and feel good about it. So I don't want to deprive meat eaters any more than I want meat eaters to deprive me.
Yeah, great strategies. I love that. We see that on menus as well, not just on buffets. So the idea of making it plant-based and then having the meat options as add-ons versus having, like I said, having a salad with cheese and meat and everything. You can have that salad be vegan, and then if you want to add the cheese and the meat, then you have to request that. So yeah, thank you for sharing all that.
Yeah,
Any
there,
other-
one other thing, the term vegetarian has been hijacked by people who eat cheese and eggs and call themselves vegetarians. And so I reluctantly have been calling myself a vegan, but I'm not. And because I wear leather belts and silk ties and things like that. So I kind of feel bad about the true vegans out there who are doing it because of their concern for animals and not wanting to see animals killed for any reason. So I kind of started liking plant-based, and then I discovered that people are now converting that to saying, well, the base of my food is plants, but then I add meat on top of it.
Yeah, that's why these terms are tricky. So labeling is so important because it is complicated. But I think of plant-based as fully vegan as far as the food is related. And then like you said, vegan can extend to the lifestyle. But the true meaning of veganism, if anyone is interested, is to abstain from harming animals as far as is practical and possible. So for example, if you're wearing leather belts that you've had for 20 years, you can still be vegan. Throwing away a leather belt doesn't make you any more vegan. So it's
Right.
just about not causing more harm, in your current life. But yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to turn it back over to Jill to close this out.
Well, thank you, ladies. That was very informative. I think a lot of people got a lot of good information. We thank you so much for joining us. And anyone on here who's not an SENFC member, please go to our website, senfc.org. It's only $22 a year. We keep it very reasonable. And please join to help keep things sustainable. That's our goal. So thank you so much. Oh, it's right exactly 12 o'clock. Look at that. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. It was great. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.